Welcome to Canada's Social Changemakers. My name is Justin Douglas, and today we're here with Campbell Stuart. Campbell is the former mayor of Montreal West, a law partner at Colby Monet, and an avid proponent of protecting public green spaces.
Thank you for being here. So just to get started, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in law and politics.
I started practicing law at my current law firm, Colby Monet, and I've been doing that now for many years, 30 years. In the 2005, I became the mayor of Montreal West when that town demerged from the agglomeration, or rather from Greater Montreal. And one of the issues which I faced as the mayor of Montreal West was the threat for development of a golf course right next door to Montreal West called Meadowbrook. And so I got involved in trying to prevent that from happening, and that, along with huge efforts by a lot of people over many years, in 2015 we finally got the City of Montreal to zone all of Meadowbrook recreational. And that really was in that effort and fight, if you want to call it that, I became much more aware of the threat to green spaces generally on the island of Montreal and elsewhere, which is a critical issue among many environmental issues. It's a critical issue for quality of life and health for us and for our descendants. And so that's really how I got involved in it. And since then, though Meadowbrook was not actually a legal fight, it was a political fight. My firm, Colby Monet, is involved now in 5 injunctions against the City of Montreal, and one of those actually being against the Aéroport de Montréal, where the city or the airport are moving in, allowing developers to move in, to destroy green spaces that they really should not be destroying, and they are doing it pretty much by ignoring the law. We came up with the idea of setting up a foundation whose purpose would be to fund legal action in defense of the environment. And the notion would be that that would be as big as we could make it. If we could make it Canada-wide, we would. We're starting more locally. And so that foundation was set up. It's called the Legacy Fund for the Environment. And the idea of that really is, as distinct from other organizations that do similar things, is that organization is not intended to actually hire its own lawyers. Rather, it is intended to concentrate on raising money and distributing that money to fund lawsuits. When I say distribute, I mean we can't just sort of give the money away. Of course, we have to oversee the conduct of it. But we want to avoid the difficulties that some other organizations, which are doing a terrific job, where they have to fundraise and hire the lawyers and conduct the case. And so that's, we think, is quite a burden for one organization to do. What we would much prefer to do would be to concentrate on finding the money, because we need serious money in this country to defend the environment. The playing field is not level. People who are out to destroy the environment have a great deal of money to spend, and they very often have politicians on their side. Whereas people who want to defend the environment tend to be small NGOs, individuals, and people who are acting locally.
Right.
And so it's very difficult. So what we want to do is kind of bridge that gap and find a means to find serious money to fund legal processes. So normally what we would do is that we would entertain proposals from not-for-profit organizations or individuals, and find with them lawyers, law firms who would undertake the case. But we would oversee the case. We would make sure that we had control over it, as we would have to do as a charity. But we would not ourselves be hiring lawyers. And we feel that by doing that, we might be able to raise significant money. And as the name suggests, we believe that it is time for people to start leaving money in their wills and otherwise for the benefit of their children and the future generally. And that time, we believe, has come.
That's a really good point, because when I think of environmental lawyers, I think of the one sort of hippie lawyer against 10 corporate lawyers sort of stacked on top of him in those sort of imagery. So it's really an interesting way to start funding these policy and legal projects. So now you said you had 5 cases in the city right now. What are they? What can you talk about publicly, and how do they affect the city green spaces?
Sure. To take the 3 that the Legacy Project is involved in, and so there are 2 in Pierrefonds
Okay.
West.
Yeah.
The other case, which as I say is not a Legacy case, which is the Dorval Municipal Golf Course case in the Aéroport de Montréal, we will also find out this year what the story is on that. So that's 3. There is another injunction that we are in the process of arguing, which involves the Technopark area in Ville Saint-Laurent. Now that, the Technopark area is an area of wetlands which actually, since we have in fact commissioned environmental studies, in fact that area is home to, I think, the 2nd most diverse bird population in Quebec.
Really?
However, the developers claim there's rien là. There's nothing there. There's nothing to see. So we find out that they in fact did their study sometime, in the dead of winter. And of course they didn't find anything. But our view is that they in fact had no, and they've actually started to build, they've actually started to destroy the wetlands, they've actually started to extend Boulevard Alfred Nobel. So they've cut down thousands of trees. But again, we are contesting whether or not they ever had the right to do that in the first place, and we're asking them to restore it.
Wow. Okay.
Again, so if we win that kind of case, you can bet your bottom dollar that people are going to think twice, because it's quite expensive to restore stuff like that.
Are there any precedents?
What we don't really have is a lot of history of our judicial branch really enforcing things like this. Very often when people take a challenge like that, the judge may say, well, yeah, they had maybe they didn't really have the right to do it, but I'm not going to order them to restore. Yeah. It's one thing to win, it's another thing to get the order to restore. That requires a certain amount of gumption, I think, on the part of judges. We're hopeful,
yeah,
and we're willing to appeal if we lose, because the lower courts are perhaps not as adventurous as we'd like them to be in looking at what is important in this life. So that Technopark one is also, we're in the middle of hearings on that. I don't know when the judgment will come down on it. So that's the 3rd of the 3 that we're doing with the Legacy Project.
Okay.
The other one is regarding the Réseau électrique métropolitain, the new electric train, the REM.
Yeah.
Which started out being $6 billion. I think they're up to $10 billion. It'll probably go higher than that. And that is, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It is a proposal to basically to privatize an electric train, a sky train kind of thing that would be built by our pension fund people, to invest money, hire Bombardier and others to build basically a sky train. A hugely expensive solution, if you want to call it that, to problems of public transit on the West Island. In our view, there are many things wrong with it, not least of which it is an environmental disaster. It is in fact designed like the railways of old, where the Caisse de dépôt would have rights to develop and to finance development along the right-of-way. Therefore, the right-of-way runs through environmentally sensitive areas because they're empty. So that's one issue. Another issue is that the environmental hearings before the Bureau d'Audience Publique sur l'Environnement, the BAP, those hearings were scheduled on very short notice. They were incomplete, and the BAP itself, in its recommendations at the end, said we can't recommend anything because you didn't give us any information. Basically, they refused to give any recommendation at all.
Wow.
So our view, and the view of the people who are in fact taking the case, well, we are arguing the case on their behalf, environmental groups and others, are taking the view that those hearings were an absolute requirement to proceeding, and since those hearings did not come up with a recommendation, the determination of the government to go ahead anyway is illegal. And so we are taking them to court. We're in fact appealing a lower court decision which rejected our case. Because the government of Quebec passed retroactive laws saying we don't really care what happened, everything we did is fine. And in our view, that's not the way to run a railroad, if that's the proper term to use. And so our view is that, that unless they do proper hearings, our constitutional right, and it is a constitutional right, to a safe and secure environment, and to a say in how our environment is modified, those rights have been abridged. And until they have proper hearings and we get a chance again to make proper representations and have the proper processes, this project has to stop.
Very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the political aspect and working with municipal governments, provincial governments, the federal governments. I would say the former mayor, Denis Coderre, is now out of office, and we have a new mayor, now Valérie Plante.
Yes.
Does that change of administration affect anything in your mind?
Yes, it certainly does. The environment as an issue is a political issue. First, last and foremost, it's a political issue. So if there are legal aspects of that that need to be addressed, they will be addressed as part of that. So a lawsuit kind of hits the nail on the head as to what our rights are that we are fighting for. It allows and permits space for people who feel that things are not being done. It gives them another avenue to express, if not win, certainly to express in a public forum what exactly it is that they don't like. Should we win, it has the virtue of actually resulting in something concrete.
Yeah.
But that's really not the most important thing. I think the most important thing is that it provides space. It creates a bow wave, if you will. It can slow things down. It can challenge the old, well, there's facts on the ground that, you know, I built this, what's your problem? What are you going to do now? Well, there is something we can do now.
Right.
So it's part of the spectrum of things that we can do. So I think it's fair to say that the politics is the most important thing, and this is only an aspect of it.
Is that a reflection, do you think, of where the public in Montreal is at in terms of the environment?
Very much so. Very, very much so. I think that if we just talk about political evolution, I think it's become very clear, and this has been a stated objective of a lot of the organizations that I'm involved in, that ultimately our fate depends on convincing the politicians that they are better off politically preserving than they are developing. And that equation has always in the past gone towards the development, but by mobilizing people, perhaps lawsuits, perhaps just generally the noise that the politicians hear on the campaign trail, starting to change around. Another thing is convincing people, good people with the right ideas from our perspective, to actually run for office.
Yeah.
Not to say, well, let's try and convince the powers that be that we ought to do it. Let's become the powers that be. And that's one thing that's happened with Projet Montréal. They become the power that is, and they have the right ideas. So I'm very pleased.
Great. So for more people who want to learn a little bit more about the Legacy Project and how to get involved in environmental protection in general, where would you suggest they look, and what advice would you have?
They can call me, or they can send me an email. That's probably the easiest way to deal with it.
Okay.
And we are in fundraising mode, and lawsuits are expensive, and though we do not yet have our charitable status, we cannot issue charitable receipts. Time and circumstance waits for no one, so we have to continue.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. The work that you're doing for environmental protection, not only in the city, but really the ramifications from these legal actions could have consequences for the entire country and environmental protection in general for the future generations. So thank you again so much for your time. It's very appreciated. And a quick thank you to Live Art, where we're filming today. Thank you for letting us use the center space today. So thank you.
Thank you very much.